Hello, my name is John Liu. Welcome to my session. Let me show the session. Make sure you're in the right session, which is on deep dive into SharePoint and Teams approval with Power Automate, which used to be called Microsoft Flow. And before we start, just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, which were hosted, and the where our Australian-based speakers like me are hosted. We would also like to pay our respects to elders, past, present, and future. If you are visiting from, participating from New Zealand, we also want to acknowledge, thank you for supporting this hui. Okay, I'm not sure how to read all that, but no, we would like to pay our respects to elders, past, present, and future. The M365 May conference has a code of conduct, and it's basically, this is a harassment-free conference for everyone, regardless of your gender, identity, expression, age, sexual orientation, disability, body size, physical appearance, race, ethnicity, religion, or technology choices. Usually I can be quite vocal about what technologies you should choose, but in this conference I will also abide by this code of conduct and be tolerant of every technology choices. We do not tolerate harassment and so on in any form. And please contact us if there is an issue with the code of conduct. And let me move on. So this talk is on deep dive into SharePoint and Teams approval with Power Automate. Quite a mouthful. It is a deep dive session, so I want to go quite deep. But we will start, at the beginning with what you can do with Power Automate or Microsoft Flow in SharePoint, and then kind of talk about how we can extend it. This is a combined demo of several approval systems that are built for different customers, as well as a lot of hacks and trying out different patterns and even merging different patterns together. So definitely let me know any feedbacks or any questions in the comments, and we'll see whether it's something that I could answer quickly or whether I need to follow up some more with the blog posts or a more in-depth video. We'll try and bring this session to about 40-45 minutes. Leave us lots of time for questions. So a little bit about me. I'm based in Sydney. I've been a developer consultant for about 20 years. The last 10 years has been in Office 365. And the last close to 3 years now, I've done a lot on the Power Platform as well. So in the Power Apps and Microsoft Flow, which is now Power Automate. I'm an MVP in both Office 365 in SharePoint and also in the Power Platform. You can find me on Twitter. Twitter is probably the best place to find me. I'm John N. Liu, so there's an extra N in it. The John Liu without the N is a ex-Twitter employee. You cannot get that thing. I can't get it. You can find me on johnliu.net. And then also I've been building several products for the Power Platform, Power Studio.app and also Power Clarity.app. So message me if you want to find out more about those products. Now, this is a text I put up. I wanted to do a deep dive into SharePoint and approvals in Office 365. This is a deep dive. It's a practical session on how to use approvals and how to create approvals in Power Automate with Office 365, particularly in SharePoint and also now in Teams as well. I want to look at some of the basic patterns, and if you have never built one, how do you get started? Then look at composing different patterns together to handle a lot of these crazy scenarios. Hopefully, some I might have to just describe, but others we can build a demo together, depending on time. Now, let's move on. So before I go very, I guess being virtual, I can't really see. But normally I would probably ask how many of you have built or are familiar with the traditional SharePoint Designer workflow and the task-based approval, and how that works. So I might just describe them in simple detail. SharePoint has always had a workflow engine. Well, not from the very beginning, but for most of its on-premises, SharePoint has a workflow engine, and the workflow engine is based on Windows Workflow Foundation. Now, Windows Workflow Foundation basically is a server. It's a component that sits in the server, so it's deployed with your SharePoint. And what it does is it runs workflow definitions similar to how Flow runs Power Automate or Flow runs a flow, and that's the definition. So the definition describes this action, then go on to the next action. Now, Windows Workflow Foundation, the definition is XML file. And what it does is it wakes up every period, say every 15 minutes, and then it checks the current action for every workflow that's running. And then it checks it, and then you see what's going on, and then it goes back to sleep if there's nothing to do. Okay, so with the way that the SharePoint Designer workflow works, that's how the engine works. So they SharePoint workflows in the past were basically built with a SharePoint list as the backing source. So you have some sort of task list, and every time this workflow system wakes up, it checks if certain task has been completed. If it has, it progresses to the next step. Okay, and that's why you have things like in SharePoint on-prem anyway. Online you can't change it as much, but in SharePoint on-prem in the classic workflow, you could increase or shorten the period that you do checks. So some people say, well, 30 minutes or 15 minutes, that's way too long. I want to check every 5 minutes. So that is definitely a setting you can do with on-prem. But then on the flip end of the scale is, if your SharePoint farm is really large, sometimes the workflow engine cannot finish checking all the actions. Right? Imagine you wake up, you have 5 minutes to check everything, and then you have hundreds and hundreds of workflows that have been running for a long time, and they're all active. So sometimes the workflow server cannot actually finish, so you get all these MN logs or MN errors. So then an MN may say, well, we need to bring up a second workflow server to help that load, or you may say we just have to bump the threshold back. So SharePoint Designer workflow has this funny thing, and hopefully this explains it, in that if you tell the workflow to wait 1 minute, it can never wait 1 minute. It will always wait the minimum 15 minutes or whatever. So sometimes you say, oh no, I just want you to kind of wait, back up for 10 seconds and come back. Yeah, it can come back in 10 seconds. It has to wait the whole time. Yeah, so that I kind of want to explain that. And then I want to talk about Power Automate. Now, Power Automate, and I can never get used to that word, but Power Automate is based on Microsoft Flow. Sorry, Power Automate or Microsoft Flow is based on Logic Apps, and the whole system is different. It's not, there are no, it's not a system that wakes up every 5 minutes and check all your flows that are running and then see if they're still going on. The whole system is built with event triggers that are from the source. So when SharePoint performs an update, it sends a webhook event to Power Automate, and that's what triggers it. So the way that the engine works is slightly different. Now, let me go into some of these demos. I do want to show you what you can do out of the box. But I wanted to just kind of give that high-level difference and intro in mind as we start. So if we come to, this is a SharePoint site. So this is a document site. So this is a SharePoint team site. If you go to any document library, there are now Power Automate integration with SharePoint. We can go to this menu and just create a flow, or you can configure one. And you see, if you configure a flow as the owner of this site, you get to quickly set these settings. Do you want approvals in this library? And that's a library setting. You can actually pick which one of the default kind of idea that you want to do. So for a document library, the out of the box two options are these. You can do a content approval, which is when it's these are two approvals that have been in SharePoint in the past. And basically now the template is re-implemented in Power Automate. Now, content approval basically means if I create a file, it starts off in draft. And when I'm ready, I could request approval, and then the flow will send emails to ask for site owner to approve this document. And then once it's approved, the flow will set the document status to published. Okay, so you have draft and publish to match how documents work in SharePoint libraries. You can also do a request sign off where you say, this document is ready, I need a manager to sign off, and then that is stored in the record. We can extend the flow, so we can decide, okay, after the sign off, I want to copy it somewhere else, so we can extend that as well. Now, the similar integration is available for Pages library. So if you create SharePoint Pages, there are now a integration with there's only one, which is the page approval flow. So this one basically, similar to the document approval, you create pages that you create now in draft, but once they're approved, they become published, and all the visitors to your site can see those pages. So these are kind of the out-of-the-box integration. Yeah, so what do I want to cover? And I guess, so that's the beginning. Oh, before I go further, I want to show this competition. If you're not sure what I'm supposed to say, but scan this QR code to enter into the prize scroll for week 3. There are many there are prizes. Thank you for attending this conference. So please scan this QR code. I'll give you a short time to scan this code. Okay, let me move on. Now, so those are the patterns that are kind of building a flow, based on the template that's supplied from SharePoint. But we can also build additional flows. And let me show an example. So I have a flow here that I wanted to show, which is this one. Okay, and if you have not seen Power Automate, so you can go to Power Automate here, and then it'll take you to your flow dashboard and create a flow. Now, the first demo I want to show is the approval escalation demo, and this one is actually I want to show as a demo, so it's not actually triggering off SharePoint items. It's just triggering off a default. This is called a flow button trigger, and the flow button trigger I like to use because it means when I'm doing a demo, I could just start one here. Okay, so clicking this will start this flow. Now, before I start, I want to quickly show you a few things. Firstly, I'm initializing a variable in flow, and I'm gonna start with the character Gimli. And this is my tenant, and in my tenant, everybody is from Lord of the Rings except me. Okay, so I have the entire crew of Lord of the Rings, all the good guys anyway. And then I have a second variable, which is whether this approval is finished. So it starts out with the value false. Okay, so this Boolean is false at the beginning. Then let's look at the right-hand side in this particular sample. We want to basically do until, so this is a continuous loop. We want to loop until the approval variable is true. Okay, and we do that by first getting, so there's an action to get the manager. We want to get the manager of Gimli. In my tenant, the manager of Gimli is Gandalf. So we're going to get Gandalf, and we're going to send Gandalf a request. So this is the basic building block of an approval in Microsoft Flow. You could choose some of these default template types. You could do everyone must approve. You could do one person of a series of people need to approve. You can also do custom responses. So you can, instead of giving people the choice of approve and reject, you can give people a list of different choices, like say if the approval was more to do with what's a good example? Yeah, you could, instead of just approve, reject, you can have different states. Approve, reject, I'm not sure, cancel the whole thing, fire Gimli, something like that. So you could create custom responses, and these two kind of matches to these two, whether you want all response or one response. Okay. Need to put in the email addresses. You could do one or many in here. That's the title. There's the detail. Now the detail is actually in a markdown format. So if you know how to write markdown, you could put that in here. And then optionally, you can have a link to the item. So if it's a SharePoint document, you will use the link to that document as well as its name. And then sometimes we add in this requester. The requester is the current person that this approval is sent on. So imagine if Gandalf receives the email, the flow runs as the person that created the flow. So this flow runs as using this connection, which is actually running as the person, as the flow owner. But you don't want an email that says John is requesting this approval. You wanted to say Gimli, the person, is requesting the approval. So we're going to switch this, and we're actually going to just use the user as the requester. Okay, and then quickly show these two branches. So this is so far is fairly simple. The part that gets tricky is this next part, which is the part we do the approval escalation. So firstly, in the approval task, go to the back page, the setting back page. We're setting a timeout, and this unfortunately is a developer. Whenever you go to the back of a flow, you'll realize it's Logic Apps roots. A Logic Apps, being an Azure product, is mainly designed for developers and administrators. So a lot of these advanced settings, they don't have a simple to use UI. It will just say things like, oh, use the example of PID, P1D. Now, this is, you could click and have a look at this format. But basically, this pattern says a period of time of 1 minute. Okay, if you want day, then you will do like this one. P1D is basically period of 1 day. Now for my demo, I just want 1 minute, because if we wait 1 day, you will never see this flow finish. So that, and then down the bottom we have two. This is the normal path where we say, okay, well, if the person's finished here, then it's approved. But if we come down here, this part is where, again, we go to the back page. We say we want to run this side if the previous stage is timed out. Okay, so we set the 1 minute timeout, and then we catch the timeout here. And this will
Hey, John, it's Rebecca here. We've got a couple of questions if you want to take them.
Sure.
So Anonymous says, does it require license if out-of-the-box flow such as approval flow?
Approval flows, these actions do not need additional licenses beyond the Office 365 license. So these are part of the free, not free, these are part of the Office 365 seeded tier.
And the other question is, what about the start and approval and wait action?
The start and approval and wait action, I'm not showing it here yet. I will show in the second demo.
Awesome. I'll let you keep going then.
Okay. So that's that. And then yeah, so this is the timeout side, this is the normal side, and this one's actually just to, because the left and the right are both okay, we basically just want an action here to say continue no matter which side you come down. So that one is really just, it's really, if you have in the programmer's head, just in the programmer's kind of thought is, one of the two sides will skip, right? This side might skip or this side might skip. So you really just want to put an action here that's always successful. So you just say, it doesn't matter if both sides skip or not. You just say, okay. Now, let's run this. Let's run this. So we're gonna start an action. And let me bring out my phone because the approval should come to me, hopefully. If it doesn't work, oh no, I need to click this. Okay. I'm never sure whether when it's spinning like this, whether it's already running or whether it's, yet to start. Usually this will flip back now, over here. Over here. Let me leave that screen spinning and open a new one. Okay, so that's the one that just started. So I don't know what this is doing. Anyway, it's already started. And what I wanted to show is this, we start the loop and then it's actually already past 1 minute, which means that the first approval, let me quickly jump in here. It means that the approval has gone to Gandalf, but Gandalf is not available. He's on the tower somewhere. So it's actually escalated to Gandalf's manager, that's me. So this is now on behalf of Gandalf, is sending it to me. I'm gonna approve this. Okay, and if we come back here, you'll see this immediately collapses because I approved it in the second tab. And having a quick look at this, there are two loops. The first of the loop, we are fetching the manager of Gimli, and we got Gandalf. And the approval went through and timed out at 1 minute and came down here, where we escalate by setting the current user to Gandalf. Okay, and then on the second loop, it went and looked for Gandalf's manager, which is me. You can manage a demigod, apparently. And this approval is then resent to me. A new approval is sent to me, which I approve. So I approve. I didn't put in any. I should probably put in the message. And that finishes the approval, and then we exit this approval escalation loop. Okay. So Flow's approval by itself has these options to do, one person must approve or everyone must approve. But if you want to add additional bits, like, oh, I want to escalate to the manager after 7 days, or I want to, or maybe 7 days too long, I want to escalate to the manager after 3 days, or escalate to an assistant, or maybe initially you have one manager assigned, but after 3 days, you're going to expand it to the whole group. Because it's kind of urgent, so anyone in the group can approve. So to build those patterns, we need to add an additional kind of compose a pattern in Flow to do that. So the way I kind of see it is, traditionally in SharePoint Designer workflow, and also with several different companies' products, you have this really complex approval action that tries to embody every type of possible approval permutation or option. So there's a lot of configuration you do in one big mega action. Whereas with Flow, everything tends to be more Lego piece blocks. And sometimes you need to extend that by combining several pieces together. Okay, so this is quite a complex example as the first approval example, but wanted to show kind of a loop escalation timeout is quite tricky, but hopefully that's something that's a good starting point. Sometimes I show this in that flow can do parallel actions. So while it's doing this approval, you can go and do other bits. Like if part of the approval, you need to generate a PDF, maybe you go and do that on the side. You don't have to wait for this approval and so on. So that's kind of the parallel branch that I wanted to show. Let me pop back here. So I kind of cover all that. Good. This is a kind of these are. I want to show some of these and then talk about some of these. If I didn't cover any of this and you really want to know, I'll pop in a question for me at the end, and then I can kind of show that. So the second example I wanted to show is this. Is more complicated, and this is where the deep dive is. And to start, I want to come to here. So in many of the work that I did for different clients, we end up extending the approval system quite a bit. And I kind of want to describe the different patterns we put together to put these type of approval systems together, and what you can then do with such an approval system. So this demo has a lot of talking, a lot of kind of ideas, but also I'm trying to, not make this a 3-hour demo. So we'll start. So generally, to build a more complex composite approval system in SharePoint, in Office 365, you end up using a SharePoint list with a model that's closer to what we had with the classic SharePoint pattern, right? So in my particular example, I created a site just for this particular demo. We have a list that's called approval. This doesn't have to be a list. It could be a document library. So it either could be documents or it could be lists. But we need to put a few more columns on this list. So if it's a document library, you need to add documents as well. I built a copy of this using document set, and document sets are kind of backing, they've been kind of ignored for a bit, but Microsoft is investing a lot more in document sets now in SharePoint Online. So happy to see that making a return. But yeah, we build systems, approval system where you're approving an entire document set. So we can build those too. Where are we? Okay, so at a very simple level, there is a list with some sort of item we want to approve. We must have an approval status to track the approvals. Let me just quickly do a quick edit, and I want to show you the different statuses we have. And typically, I build things that have a draft status, so something you're still, like the person hasn't submitted yet. You're still kind of adding more bits. You may have to attach documents. You have to, write down what you're trying to get approved. So typically, that's this in the draft stage. Then there is a submitted stage for my in this process. The submitted stage is the one that triggers the approval. Okay, and then the approval will put it immediately into a processing. So this the flow will immediately update that, and then within you may have multiple stages. This is completely up to you. Some people have just one approval flow, but most of the more complex scenarios, you have a manager approval, then you have some sort of the business unit approval, and then for especially money related approvals, you may have a senior management approval and a CFO approval. You could have multiple stages. And within each stage, there may be more than one person, right? So it's not necessarily one person. It's like anyone from this group can approve this stage. So I kind of want to show that in there. And then at the end, you end up with an approval rejected. You may have additional workload that says, well, if you're only rejected, let's just put that back into draft again. And then we can, rework this approval and restart it over. Or maybe you just want to say, no, you can't restart. So you just have to copy the rejected into a new item and start over. And then in my particular example, I have a value of $5. Just checking the time. So let me put this back into submitted, and we'll start this approval flow. Let me double check something. Let me close that one. Yeah, let me close that one. Just want to make sure I'm in a. Okay, so I still have one run from earlier. Let me cancel this one off so we can start from scratch. Good. So if I come to here and then I hit submitted. Oh, did that run already? Hold on. Oh, wow. That's coming here. I wanted to kind of show you quickly high level how this is supposed to work, and then maybe expand some of this. So when we start, we run a trigger. This is a trigger based on when an item is created or modified. Okay. Now, in general, if you have created in draft and then at some point you submit, then the modified trigger will catch it. But sometimes it's a very simple one. You just want to create and submit at the same time. So that could happen. We use this trigger. The item is pretty simple. It's got approval this lunch. Let me, instead of this one, while I talk about that, let me just quickly start a second one. Approve lunch. And this one is $100. And let's just put that into submitted. Okay, so that's gonna start a second one. And let's continue looking at this. And then, so we have a variable tracking what this is to track. So basically, we want to start the approval, and then we want to check if it's in submitted status, then we want to actually run this flow. So in here, we do a very quick conditional check to say, if the current item is in the submitted status, we want to continue. And we continue by updating the current item to pending. So we move it out of submitted status, and then we continue down here. Now, if it's not in submitted status, we want to actually just terminate. So that means that's mainly so that as we're updating the original item, you don't keep knocking over or restarting this flow, right? This flow will start here and terminate and leave. Now, there are more advanced pattern that you should consider when you're doing this kind of conditional termination, is to then put this in an expression inside the trigger condition. So that is something that we can do. When you apply the trigger condition expression, then this flow will not run if it's not in the right state. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I'll show you how to kind of do that in a minute. Now, the idea then in here is we need to build several texts. So there is a markdown form of, okay, this is the item that needs to be approved, submitted by me. And also it is $5. So this is the earlier one. And also a HTML form. Okay, and that's mainly because in an approval action, you generally have a you have an approval action that takes markdown, so you need this guy. But then a lot of times you want to send an email to say, oh, your item has been approved, or your item has been rejected. So if you're sending email directly to a person rather than an approval, you actually need a HTML because you can't say markdown in an email. So we had this funny situation where you need to keep both a markdown form of how you want your users to see this approval as well as the HTML form. Okay, and we calculate that up front because we're going to use it quite a bit later. And this is actually now waiting for approval in my list. So let me pop over there and So that one's the one I've canceled. Let me just approve this one real quick. Okay. And you see this one's just being approved. And this is probably better explained in here. I just pop into edit. So a few more pieces in this stage. Now, this approval loop, I create an array here called stage. And in this demo, I've only got one stage. And then let me explain stages in a sec. But so this apply loop loops over this array. So it means that there's potentially one or multiple stages that we go through. So this is variable. And then for each stage, we're basically checking, is the current status still approved? If it's ever rejected from an early stage, we're going to skip all the remaining stages and finish. Okay, so it's kind of an exit condition if you end up in a reject. And then, so for each stage, these are very common steps that we do. Generally, there was a question earlier about how to, do you want to do a start approval and then a wait approval as two different actions? And that's what I'm doing here. And there's tradition. Let me add this action and then explain. So when we do approval, there are two sets. You have these. Traditionally, you have this create an approval, but now in V2 of the approvals system, we now have a start and then, traditionally we have start and wait. Now we have create and then wait being two different actions. I want to show you in this particular pattern, I use this. So this is the create approval. We're gonna, very similarly, assign it to a person, use the markdown that we calculate upfront, the item and the detail. Make sure you set the requester to be from the original person that submitted. Otherwise, it's going to end up all coming from me, which is not right. First to respond. So that will create the action. But then afterwards, we want to, what do we want to do? We want to actually do a few more things. When we create the approval, if we use the action that says create and wait, then the flow will immediately pause on this one action, and there's no way for you to log anything for your own debugging or for other checking purposes. So when we are able to break it into create and then the wait here, that means in between we can do a few more things very quickly. The first thing we do is we update the, this is not CapEx, but we update the approval and change the status. So we can actually change the status. This probably shouldn't say approval, but this should be saying waiting stage 1, right? So that's what I should say. And then, so that's the wrong one. That should just say waiting stage 1. And then here we do an additional thing, which is we create a second list in the flow here for approval history. And the approval history basically allows us to track, and I didn't fill this out completely. So wait for my blog post where I fill this whole thing out. But generally, you want to track what's happening with your approval, because with the approval system, it's kind of a, and my daughter tried to join me. With the approval system, it's trying to, it kind of become a black box, right? The approval is waiting and you can't, you don't really know what's going on. So the approval history allows us a way to see, okay, for item number 1, it is waiting on this approver and the URL to this approval is here. And when someone approves it, we write the response as well. So, so that's that. So that's the approval history. That should be, I haven't filled it all in, sorry. I probably won't do it now, but that would be the ID there and so on. And then, so this kind of happens before we start waiting, right? So we quickly create the approval that we're gonna start, and then we quickly log details of it to a SharePoint list, to 2 lists actually. and then we start the wait. This is the one that actually waits for the earlier one. And then the outcome of this, we set the approval variable to the outcome. So it's either approve or reject. If it's approved, we go into the next stage. If it's rejected, then we kind of escape the whole loop here. This will escape. And then here you may say you can send additional emails to people. So generally, you may want to notify the person who submitted at the first. Imagine Gimli is a submitter. At each stage of the approval, he gets a little email that says, "Oh, it's past stage 1, approved by these people." Or sometimes people may approve and give a comment. So you might want to capture that comment and send that back to the submitter. And then at the end of this stage, we do a second history log. Basically log what was the outcome of the approval and so on. So that's actually log. That's the wrong list. So I kind of wanted to show this this pattern. And then let me talk about this last bit. So the stages, I haven't built it out here, but let me show you what it's supposed to do. Stages is the third list, and it's an optional one. But the idea of stages is that in the case of an approval that involves money, generally you say, well, there are, stage 1, and that is, between $10 to $1,000, and that requires Gandalf to look at it. And then stage 2 is between anything from 10 to 1 million. And that requires John. Okay, so create a list such as this. Then in the action here, we first fetch the list from SharePoint. Then we filter the list based on the item that's submitted. So the item says, this is a $100 demo. So you can filter the stages to figure out which stage is actually necessary. And then you enter the apply to each loop with those stages. So it's a way for you to say, okay, when the money is quite small, we don't want to do the multiple level approval. We just need one stage. The manager approvals is enough. But when it's really large, then we need to involve more people and pull them in and out. There's one more bit which I did, which is this action. So right before we send the approval to someone, SharePoint has an action called grant share item with someone. It's this one. Let me show. I tend to rename all my actions, which makes it hard to demo. But SharePoint has an action called grant access to an item. This action. And this basically, you basically want to use the same ID. So in a scenario where you're building in permissions as well into your list, you may have a thing where people can submit new approvals, but they can't see other people's approvals. Okay, so for such a scenario, you want to break the permission inheritance upfront at the top. When the item's created, break inheritance, and only the creator can see it. But once you're submitted, and as you're going through the approval stages, you want to add whoever is the approver. So in this case, it's me. But you want to make sure whoever is the approver to this item is granted added permissions. You probably don't need to send them an email, otherwise they get all these, item is shared with you emails. So don't send an email. But you want to add the permission. So if you're thinking to do like a scenario of, add additional permission to my manager just before he clicks this item to see what this document or this item is about, there's that. Now, let me wrap up and bring that back. So stages is kind of fixed. You kind of set up different variables and then use that to filter. Make sure there's a good sort order. So, you want this to go before this. You may have to bring in additional order column so you can sort it in the flow. But the approval history, not particularly set up correctly, but approval history eventually becomes, imagine this will basically look a bit like this. Sorry, let me just fake it. And this will basically say, Gandalf and John. And it will say approved. Okay, and there's a bunch of dates as well in it. So eventually the approval history becomes something that you can build a matrix if you wanted to see, oh, who hasn't approved this thing? Who is waiting on? The approval history will tell you. You can filter by the ID to just, item 91. And then it will say, oh, okay, it's go up to stage 2. It's waiting for John. He hasn't approved it yet, and so on. So, yeah, so from here you can customize the SharePoint view. So you can customize the current view, edit the current view, format the current view. You can put in a nice conditional formatting, or even use the advanced mode and put in a JSON view on the SharePoint. You can also, some people take this into a Power BI, so they build a whole Power BI dashboard where it can show everyone's approvals or group by different managers and see what they're stuck on. I imagine you can filter here and say, no, I just want to know, the ones where John is super slow. Why is he always taking so long? So let's clear that. So that's really cool. The other thing is, if you build this with Power App, so imagine you have a Power App in front of this list. So you have a nice experience for your user to kind of fill in this approval request. Then, there will be an ID. This is ID 1. And then in your Power App, you can actually read the approval history, filter on the item ID, and essentially tell your users what's going on right now. Like your Power App will say, oh, this approval is in stage 1, and it is awaiting for some sort of, it's in stage 1, but then you go to the screen that says approval history, and any user could see, oh, okay, it's waiting on this person, and so on. So that's another customization that you can do. Now, let me come back here. I just remember there's one more piece I can do, which is when we create the approval stage, we can also do that now. And from this approval, which is being created, there is this value called the adapted card. So adapted card is the JSON. When Flow creates a when Flow creates a approval, it sends a card to people. Let me show you real quick if you've never seen it. I hope you've seen it, but let me just share in case you haven't. Now, yeah, potentially was. Oh yeah, here we go. So a card that's sent through, it looks like this, right? So remember I said that the approval needs to be a markdown. It gets sent and it looks kind of like this. You can do inline approval here, and that will send it back directly to Flow. Now the markdown is very clever in that, see this one very quickly refreshed. See, I don't know. Let me quickly show you again. Damn it, it's cached. That one's also refreshed. So you see that the markdown will show its initial approval request, but while it's thinking, it quickly go and talk to Flow and check if the approval has already finished, and then it will actually update. So imagine if you send an approval to 5 different managers and one of them has already approved. When the other managers see this item, it will just say, oh no, it's already done. You don't need to worry about it. So that's super useful, cuts down a lot of confusion over approval systems. But this is basically an approval card. And what we can do now, this is actually a fairly recent change, is you can take that card, you can take Teams, And there is one, it's called post approval card to a Teams user and wait for the response, still in preview. So pop in the user's name here. I'm just typing myself real quick. And then send the adapter card. I think I'm just gonna stick the card in here. Here we go. Okay, so that will actually send the same card to the person, and that will arrive in the Teams channel. This is being sent to a Teams user, so you'll get it in your team chat. It'll be an adapter card that you can click on. You do need to actually, you don't want to wait for a response. You want to just send the card because you want to wait for it here. Yeah. Anyway, I won't run that demo, but hopefully you get the idea. So you can take the card, send it to people and then this waiting stage. So you want to send the card and don't wait for response, but when they click it, you will come back here. Okay. Or you could do a parallel. You could, anyway, you can do like this. Put that here. Anyway, I won't mess it up now, but more ideas to play with. So let me wrap this up. I think I'm running way over time. Sorry. Licensing conditions, I do want to talk about this. If you're just using Office 365 pieces, Teams, SharePoint, Flow, there are no additional licensing. If you are going to use any premium, you need to think about how the flow is triggered. If the flow is triggered on a SharePoint item, then it runs as the owner, so it runs as the maker. So you need really one premium license on the person that created the flow, which is me. So you don't need to have premium for every user. Now, if you use a special trigger, which is run flow on the current item, it's a special trigger called for selected item, then the flow will run in the context of the person that started the flow. If you use that trigger, then every person, and if that flow uses premium, then every person needs a premium license for that one. So just keep that in mind. You may want to integrate with Common Data Service because the flow states, approval and approval requests are actually stored in the Common Data Service. So if you want to use that to synchronize that detail over to SharePoint, then you will need a separate flow running with the premium account to synchronize the approval states over to SharePoint. But typically in the pattern that I described, you don't need to interact with CDS directly. And I just want to tidy up these three things. So there are some tricky bits you can do with flow. There is no concept of wait until an item property is changed. There's something in the SharePoint Designer. This is not a concept that's currently available in Flow. There are workarounds for this, but it's not easy. It involves polling the item quite a lot. The current item's value may not be current. So SharePoint Designer has this idea that if you do current item got property, it will tell you what that value is right that second. Whereas flow tend to be when you trigger the action, that's the value then. Right? So in approval workflows, we tend to wait hours or even days. So other properties on the item may have changed during the time that it's sitting in approval. So in your stages before you create the approval detail and send to each user, you may want to read the current item again, just make sure it's the current value. And finally, I mentioned this already, we need to keep an email HTML copy and then a markdown copy because approval needs a markdown, but if you're sending emails as well, then you need HTML. So you kind of need to have both. Lots of references, I'll keep them. Search Looker, Dr. Flow, just search for Dr. Flow. I'm Flow Ninja, it's Dr. Flow. Probably did almost all the major groundwork from the beginning. A lot of his blog posts, the escalation is a pattern that he created. I love the escalation pattern, so I always show that as the first demo. He talks about how to build a Power BI dashboard as well, following that. And then he goes on to talk about a full state machine pattern, including a flow run 30 days. If a time's out, how do you restart? In my example, will actually time out on 25 days, set the flow back to submitted, and just restart itself. But because the stages, you can configure the stages to skip, so there's a way to skip over them if they've run already. So that's that. You can find me on johnliu.net, and you can find my company, which is Flow Studio. It's a product, so it's flowstudio.app. Thank you, and I guess I'll take any questions.
You have left exactly 5 minutes for questions, which is awesome.
Yeah!
Do have a couple.
Okay, go.
You did good. Alrighty. So the first one is from Dave. Can we add custom statuses to the build in approval status column rather than creating a separate status field that end users can manipulate?
You don't have to show this bit. So you can hide this. But yes, I know what you mean. Like, oh, I don't want the users to manipulate it. What's the easiest way to do that? The easiest way to do it is to hide it, I think. Because, yeah, to hide it so and then don't make that a default view. I don't know whether that's a good answer. Because if you try to tell SharePoint to be clever and don't show the column, Flow may not be able to show it. So you end up here, and then Flow won't, this column won't appear for you, which makes it super difficult to update the column when you need to. So I would say hide it in here. It's probably the easiest for this particular case. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. Dave, let us know in chat if that answers your question or not.
Yeah.
One from Anonymous. If the trigger is set to start when a file is created or modified, but rubbing using a single, does all the users upload the documents needs to have a license? So does everyone need to have a license?
No. If you use the trigger, which is up item creator modified, this flow runs as me. It runs as the owner. So flows really have this concept, and this is probably a greater licensing conversation. But flow, if you look at it, has this concept of a automated trigger. So this is like SharePoint update an item or item.creator. It's an automated trigger. And then you have the instant trigger. Instant triggers are things like when you click a button or when you, let me show you instant trigger for a selected file. So this is an instant trigger. It basically, when I save this flow in your document library, when you select here, there will be a thing that says start my flow. And when you click it, a panel will appear that will start a flow as the current user. In the SharePoint classic workflow, it's the workflow initiation dialog. It's that pattern. So you can actually say start the flow and ask a few more parameters. But then that flow will run in the context of the active user. Now, if your flow then use premium, the instant flows needs a license for every user, but automated flows runs in the context of the maker. And it means that you need one premium, so it's not too crazy, but you do need to then think about every flow runs as the single account. If this list is quite busy because everybody in the company is using it, you may need to think about, well, is there enough capacity on the license, or maybe you need to buy even more runs on that. But generally, if you're not, if you stick to automated triggers, you're not worried about, oh, 2,000 people need to update this list because it's one premium license. Now, the patterns I've shown today do not require premium. So you can use it for both instant as well as automate. Right? I try to build a pattern that sticks to what's available inside the Office 365. But yeah, if you need to call out to Azure Functions, if you need to call out to Azure Automate, or if you need to do some fancy stuff in Microsoft Graph that's not available, then yes, you do need premium in certain places as well.
Cool. Well, yeah. Anonymous said, thank you for the clarification. And we just got one more from Dave as a follow-up to his question before about the custom statuses. He says, or is this on for content approval flows where there is a separate built-in approval status column. Apologies for my poor reading skills.
Right. The content approval is tied to a different action. I'll quickly show you. And yes, that is a built-in column. But if I show you SharePoint, SharePoint is one of the biggest connectors with a lot of different actions. There's this one called content approval status, this one. Okay, and that basically lets you pick the submit, approve, reject. And this is tied to SharePoint's built-in draft approval system. So if you turn on this library has content approval, or this list has content approval, these columns are mapped to those columns. So it's very specific in how this works. By the way, you also need to grab an E tag. Type this star if you just don't want to use it. Anyway. But yeah, that's specifically to do with document approval. Like if you want to interact with the default SharePoint ability to do document approval. And the main reason to use the default one is usually permission related, because SharePoint has an out-of-box ability to say some people can see draft and other people can only see publish. So if you want to use that kind of feature, you may want to do this. The way I've tackled it in my multi-stage example is I just make sure only the person submitting could see it initially, and then as different people need to approve it, I grant them explicit permission. So if you look into the item permission, there is all these additional individual permissions attached to these items. Yeah. That's
awesome.
the pattern I do.
Well, no more questions, which is good because we are definitely 2 minutes over time. So thank you very much, John. I always look at your sessions and think I need to take a whole month off to learn how to do this stuff. It's amazing. We had lots of good questions. Thank you to everybody who joined, and thank you, John.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.